What's up, guys? Welcome to a new day. I'm Stephanie Ryder, and this is the 365 Shares podcast. The Big Red Book says we can pinpoint and measure our loss by comparing the treatment we received as children in dysfunctional families with the care we could have received if raised by loving, consistent parents. This is a really tough topic. Grief work is something that is so difficult to do. The book says we often cover our grief with anger or blame in an effort to protect ourselves from how much the grief and the sadness of what happened to us in childhood or what didn't happen for us in childhood hurts. And it hurts so much. I think most of the coping mechanisms that we have, most of the unhealthy feelings that we have are really just protecting our inner child from re-experiencing this pain. And it's something that everyone has to do it on their own time. The ACA program really helps. Therapy really helps. Being patient with yourself helps. But there's just ultimately no way around grieving what could have been. So I'm with anyone who's in that grieving process. If you would like to start your healing, but you're worried about the pain of that grief, there is a lot you can do without getting into the really deep trauma. And ACA, I think, is great for that because you can be a passive ACA member for as long as you want. You can open a Zoom meeting and keep your camera off and your mic muted as long as you want. You can go to a meeting and just sit there and not share and listen and just take in everything people are saying. It's all helpful. You can get a cognitive behavioral therapy workbook. You can do the exercises. You can go to therapy. You can develop a meditation practice or a yoga practice or start going for walks or runs outside. There's so many things you can do to help yourself build the tools that you will need to rely on when you get to your ultimate grief. And I've talked about this before, but I think it's a lot like a video game. And I have a friend who a few years ago was playing the Spider-Man game. It was a really cool game where they basically mapped all of Manhattan, which is super cool as someone who's lived in New York. It was really cool for me to watch him fly through New York and, you have to go to the top of a roof and get a message somebody left roofed, or you have to fight a group of hooligans in an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn. There's just so many things to do, but visually it was really cool. And he talked about that there's all these little side missions. Your real goal is to get to the big boss and beat the boss. But there's all these little side missions. There was a cat burglar who would leave you little notes and send you on adventures. And everything you did that took time, quote unquote, away from the mission gave you more tools. It helped you practice your fighting skills. It gave you more weapons or context or clues that he said he really needed when he ended up getting to the boss level. And I think trauma work, grief work, any type of healing is a lot like that, where you don't have to just get on a bullet train and go from where you are right now to the most traumatic event in your childhood without stopping. You can get a horse-drawn buggy or a pedicab, or you can just walk and meander around in no particular order and say anything that comes up for me, I'm just going to address it. And that's why we often start with just things that happen in our day-to-day lives that are occurring more in the present, because it's a little bit easier, it's more accessible. You don't have to just dive to the bottom of the ocean and open the Pandora's box that contains your worst fears and your worst nightmares and your deepest pain. So don't rush grief work. It is overwhelming when you do get into it. I don't want you to avoid it, but have a healthy sense of respect for the amount of emotional energy it's going to take for you to really deal with the worst things in your life. And start small, build your building blocks, get stronger, get more skins, get more armor, get more weapons, form more allies. Make sure you have people on your side who understand what you're going through. If you only have people in your family of origin who are still committed to a dysfunctional way of life, if you only have friends who are heavily relying on coping mechanisms like drinking, then you might need to bring more people into your life. You might need to meet some new recovery friends, which is where meetings are great because you can meet people who are committed to recovery. Any type of group therapy might be helpful. because people all have the same common goal. Or, meet friends at the gym, yoga, church, any type of religious organization. Anything where you can build up a community of people you can rely on so that when you are having a really bad day because you're in it with your grief work, you don't just have people in your family who are like, that wasn't a big deal, get over it. Or like, oh, I'm not still thinking about our childhood. Just move on. Have a good day. Make sure you have people in your life that respond with helpful comments like, your feelings are valid. That sounds really painful. I'm so sorry you're going through this right now. Is there anything I can do to support you? And if you don't have people like that in your life, don't dive right into your grief work. Build that community. Have your army of people who are supporting you and who are going to help you reach your goals. I'm Steph, and this is my share. The affirmation for today is, on this day, I will hold on to the ACA process when the grief and emotions are screaming. I will stop at nothing to recover my original self. When I've been going through a lot of my toughest grief work, and I feel thankfully like a lot of the worst stuff is in the past in terms of what I have to work through, I needed so much support. And a lot of it was before I found ACA. So I really relied heavily on my partner for support. And there was one day specifically where I had him drive me to therapy, something I did myself every week and was capable of doing, but I had him drive me to therapy and walk me in. And I sat in my therapist office and basically just sobbed the entire time because I was trying to go in and talk about something that was going to be really painful. And my inner child just didn't want to talk about it. And I think that stems from when I was a kid and my parents were in couples counseling, and they were they were seeing the same person. He ended up being a very problematic character who gave them some very bad advice, unfortunately. But they were both seeing him, then they split up, and then they continued to see him individually, which is not a good idea. I've heard other people's parents have done this as well. You should never go from seeing one person together as your couples counselor to both people individually going to therapy with that person, because inevitably they will take one person's side more than the other side. And it's just not really a good way to go. You need one person for couples counseling that neither of you is doing individual counseling with. If you think it would be helpful for both of you individually to also have couples counselors, have two other people that you're each seeing. But my parents were seeing this person. I instinctively didn't really trust him. Turns out my instincts were good. And when they would drag me in, then they would drag me into myself. I would also have sessions with this person, which now we're adding another layer of impropriety to it. You can't have one person doing couples counseling and then counseling two people who are actively getting divorced individually and counseling their children. It doesn't make sense. So I learned to stonewall him, and I would never give him information because I didn't want him to take anything I said and use it in a way that I wasn't comfortable with against either of my parents, which I have a therapist friend and he works with kids, and he was like, yeah, your instincts were good. That was not a safe situation. So my inner child was very resistant to talking. And in ACA, we say we need to break the family rules of don't talk, don't think, don't feel. And in a lot of families, especially dysfunctional families, there's a lot of secrecy because the parents or the caregivers know that things aren't going the way that they should be going, whether they're actively abusing or molesting a child, or they just know that the family's falling apart and they want to put a good face on it. But they'll tell the kids, don't tell anyone about this. Snitches get stitches. There's this very clear message that kids internalize that they're not supposed to tell the world when things are wrong. And that's learned from the parents who also learned that growing up. You might have partners where one spouse is physically abusing another spouse, and the person who's getting abused is covering bruises with makeup. And then the kids see that and they internalize that. And then the kids get smacked around, or they go for a few days without getting fed or bathed, and they don't tell anyone because they've just internalized that message. So it's really hard to get your inner child to a place where it feels comfortable actually talking to someone about, especially the deep grief stuff, the stuff that you're super ashamed of. It wasn't right. It was so painful. And so my partner took me to this therapy session and I just sit and cried. And we didn't really accomplish anything in that session, but it meant so much to me that he took me and then he picked me up. And if you take nothing else away from this in terms of how you process your grief and what you're doing, whether that's in meetings, therapy, journaling, meditation, anything, have people to support you. My partner has been such an immense source of support for me, and I think I have been a huge source of support for him as well. And we both have grown so much individually while we've been in our partnership. And we've taken breaks and we've worked on things individually and gotten back together. And that helps too. But just to have people who are on your side. And like I said, don't diminish your feelings. Don't try to sweep things under the rug. If you're in a place, in a headspace where you're ready to open that Pandora's box of your grief, make sure you have people around you that are like, all right, like this might be the Ark of the Covenant and our faces are going to all melt off, but let's do it because you have to do it. Ultimately, what I found was that we have so much terror around the black box that we keep all of our worst feelings and memories in, because when we were kids and when it happened, everything was scary. Everything was bigger than us. Everything was unmanageable. We didn't have adults to support us. But now we're the adults. We have adult feelings. We have context. We have a support system, hopefully. We have therapy tools that we've acquired and that we're still actively honing. What I found ultimately was when I went through the process of slowly getting to the worst parts of my grief, when I finally did build up all of my courage and open that box, it wasn't as scary as I remembered it to be. And it reminded me of the Star Wars trilogy with Rey, where she's like going deep down into the depths and she needs to know the secrets of her family. And ultimately, it's this huge buildup of like, who is she going to find? And like, is her father Luke Skywalker and all this stuff? And she just ultimately comes back and is like, it's nothing. It was nothing. My parents were nobody. And we, whether or not that turns out to be the case in future versions of the story, we don't know. But in terms of that series, what she was afraid of ended up being kind of nothing. I had this image of like this chest filled with monsters that I was so afraid to open and like all these demons were going to fly out. But it had been closed and locked and sealed airtight inside my psyche for such a long time that like when I opened it, I just imagined it being filled with dust because like all these monsters had died. And I was so afraid of this thing that didn't exist anymore. Like my childhood trauma doesn't exist anymore. I'm not in a position where I'm being neglected. I'm not in a position where I'm being a victim of domestic violence. I'm not in a situation where I have no agency. I am now an adult. I have an education. I have adult friends and a partner. So I think that once you have your support system in place and you're ready to open that box, remember that your inner child may still be just as scared and sad as it was originally when all this stuff happened to you, but that you're now here. You are an adult and you have all these resources that your inner child didn't have, or your actual self as a child didn't have. And that's a big part of ACA too, is just becoming your own loving parent. So make sure that you have in mind these two versions of you, your scared inner child and your capable, loving adult version that can protect you throughout this process. And I got a nice decal a couple years ago when I was going through something difficult with work. I'm sure it's intended for like a little kid's bedroom. You can get it any color, but I got a hot pink decal and it's an adult woman holding a little girl's hand. And I got it and just put it up in my office as, this is me protecting my inner child, making sure that whatever happens, we're in this together. And a lot of people will tell you to visualize your inner child and, have her stand behind you, or have her go in her room and shut the door and play with dolls, or envision like a calming field filled with flowers that you can just send your inner child to go play in while you deal with the tasks at hand. So whatever helps you, whether it's, partners and community, whether it's putting things in perspective of that was then and this is now, whether it's visualizing being your own loving parent and stepping in a more capable way with more power than you had when you were younger, just know that you can get through it. whatever it is, whatever you're dealing with in your grief, I promise you, you can get through it.